Welcome back to our handover countdown about the past, the present and the future of Hong Kong. Hong Kong's civil service has made the transformation from a colonial administration to a modern-day government, but its development has been full of controversies and challenges. In a special series, Rudowski looks at some of the problems faced by the civil service and the challenges that lie ahead. In part 1, he looks at the development and impact of localization on both local and expatriate officers.
Hello, mate. 441.
Inspector Jonathan Close looks forward to a long career as a Hong Kong police officer.
I don't feel threatened. I don't think it's going to change too much over here at present. But again, there's everything you don't know until it occurs. I'm quite happy to wait and see.
In 1995, Inspector Close was one of the last 5 expatriates to go through police training.
The Chinese officers are so used to working with expatriates. I think they judge you more on how good you are at the job rather than whether you're an expatriate or not. So I don't feel uncomfortable working here. Inspector Close.
The 28-year-old manages a team of detectives. They operate in Chinese, he in English. While that part of the day-to-day operations will stay the same after the handover, the current civil service has recently undergone many cultural changes. Expatriates have always been a minority in the civil service, but enjoyed a great deal of power and influence. That has dropped sharply. 20 years ago, 70% of senior positions were held by expatriates. Today, only 30% are. Alan Roger works as a computer expert in the legal department. The 10-year veteran fears his days may be numbered after the handover.
If we could remove this cloud of racial discrimination, then I'd be far more comfortable staying in Hong Kong.
It's an ironic statement to many local civil service veterans who say until recently those roles were reversed. They remember obstacles to joining and promotion in the Hong Kong civil service. Former Judge Simon Lee was among the first Chinese civil servants to reach senior ranks.
I knew my career was limited in the legal department. Certainly, I would not be Attorney General.
From its start, the civil service used a 2-tiered system of hiring and pay. Being a colony in a backwater, the Hong Kong government offered expatriates various perks and benefits to attract skilled professionals. Local officers still resent that.
When you look at the people who can be employed on better terms, that is on the overseas terms, it says discreetly that if you have a tie with Hong Kong, China, Macau, and Taiwan, you are out. It is very, very discriminatory, but it's discriminatory against locals.
Colonial regulations state localization was always the goal in the colonies, but until recently, that was never aggressively pursued in Hong Kong, and this created more tension.
All the other places could clearly head towards independence, whereas Hong Kong was an oddity. And I think for that reason, localization wasn't pushed in the same way as elsewhere.
As the handover approached, the government stepped up localization. The basic law stated all policy secretaries and a number of senior administrators had to be Chinese. The last one to step down will be Attorney General Jeremy Matthews, who remained in his post right up to the handover. He'll be replaced by Elsie Leung. But analysts say these changes aren't just superficial, they will have a long-term impact.
I would expect, of course, that it will become increasingly more Chinese. More emphasis might be paid to human feelings and faith in coming up with decisions, in dealing with the public, in handling the matters of promotion and things like that.
Now, many expatriates are fighting part of the government's localization policy. To speed it up, the government recently demoted a number of expats. They fought back, charging discrimination. Though not affected, Alan Roger led the fight, fearing the policy could be a sign of things to come.
The fact that legislators in Hong Kong and that the government in Hong Kong is actually imposing discriminatory policies disturbs me for the future of Hong Kong.
In 1996, the Court of Appeal agreed that parts of the localization policy were discriminatory, but those demoted have not yet been reinstated.
We think the government should never have lost the case if it has brought the historical and social context in the right perspective. Because it is one problem with the government, they never admit that in the very first place they discriminate against Chinese people.
But expatriates are leaving the civil service at a rate of 200 per year. This past year, a group awakened old wounds by enjoying their last perk, a cruise back to Britain. Those who remain vow to fight the government over demotions, but admit given the history of the colonial civil service, there is little sympathy for their cause.
And Hong Kong's civil service is considered among the cleanest in Asia, but that was not always the case. Corruption was so rampant at one time that residents complained that it touched every aspect of their lives. In part 2 of a series on the civil service, Ray Rudowski looks at the corruption problem in the past and what the future may hold.
May 1967. A labor dispute sparked 6 months of riots and bloodshed in Hong Kong. It was fueled by communist elements inspired by China's Cultural Revolution. 51 people, including 10 policemen, died in the violence. Though not directly aimed at the Hong Kong government's policies, the riots served as a wake-up call.
It gave the government a shock. Yes, they retained the loyalty of the vast majority of Hong Kong people, but they wished to bring it out even more. It forced them to recognize the nature of changes that were occurring in Hong Kong. It forced them to recognize that they got huge surpluses in budget, they've got to give something back.
In the years that followed, social spending increased and government services expanded. The winds of change were blowing, but they also carried a foul smell.
Everything you can think of was corrupt. If you were due to get housing from a demolition of squatter areas, you had to pay somebody in the housing department.
I rather suspect that we're getting out of hand a little in Hong Kong and the importance that we attach to this.
His name was Peter Godber. He was a hero during the '67 riots. He was a good cop. He was also a bad cop.
A bank in Canada informed the Commissioner of Police that this man had a very large sum there, and that made the Commissioner aware that something might be wrong.
Officials were puzzled at how Godber amassed $4 million in foreign bank accounts. When questioned in 1973, Godber fled to England, was arrested, brought back, and convicted of accepting a bribe to give a promotion.
Oh, good God, it's an extra.
I asked for it, my love. I know what you like.
There is a distressing lack of alcohol in prison.
The testimony of Ernest Taffy Hunt helped put Godber away. The flamboyant Hunt was also convicted of corruption and served a year in prison. Both emerged unrepentant.
I think it was political considerations, really. I mean, Godber had fled, and they had to have a scapegoat. I think the Chinese refer to it as Tai Se Guayama. Am I?
Well, it's very easy to use the word frame-up, of course. It has a James Cagney touch about it, but I pleaded not guilty, and I still maintain that plea of not guilty. The evidence, to my mind, was fabricated.
His position was, well, look, quite simply, I stopped murders. If there was a murder committed, I found them. I stopped robbery. Okay, I took a bit of money on the side, but so what? What is more important is my beat was well behaved. And so the fella could never really accept that he'd behaved in a corrupt fashion.
The government was forced to create an independent graft-fighting unit because the police couldn't be trusted. Sir Jack Cater became the first head of the Independent Commission Against Corruption.
We knew where a lot of corruption was. And so it wasn't a question of picking up and picking on the police force. It was those who were being corrupt whom we attacked.
Hundreds of officers were arrested and the police rioted. To prevent a mutiny, the government granted an amnesty.
We certainly were alarmed, yes. It wasn't very clear what you can do if a force of 25,000 people, all armed, ceased to enforce the law.
Hong Kong's system could not have continued to operate with that level of corruption. It just couldn't. Hong Kong was moving from a developing economy into a developed economy. And developed economies and high levels of corruption do not go well together.
But recent figures show corruption in the civil service rose in the first part of 1997.
On the whole, the Hong Kong civil service is clean, but in every major department you are bound to have somebody who might be tempted to break the law. And corruption is not something you can remove 100%. We can only try to reduce corruption to a minimum.
In a recent case, in late 1996, the ICAC smashed an alleged vehicle smuggling ring. Investigators believe customs officers were involved in a scheme to smuggle vans into China. ICAC veterans believe, with Hong Kong a part of China, this type of cross-border crime is now the agency's biggest challenge.
I think the difference in my day was that we saw little crime in China itself. That came with the opening up of China. But it seems to me that there is a lot of corruption in Guangdong now.
The ICAC has become a source of fear and pride in the Hong Kong civil service, but it's now fighting a possible name change. The future SAR government wants to remove the word independent from its title. But even the agency's director fears losing the I may lead many to believe the group is losing its teeth.
And we'll continue with our examination of the civil service after this break.